Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode is probably one of my favorites. I remember watching bits and pieces of this episode. I remember watching this when it was still airing, and I didn't watch the whole thing, but I kind of regret the fact that I didn't because it adapts one of my favorite fictional things. So essentially this episode, Wrath of the Krampus, essentially if you don't know what the Krampus is, and they do adapt it kind of sort of for Mystery Incorporated lore, but the Krampus is a mythological Christmas figure, kind of like Santa Claus, except back before Santa Claus was Santa Claus. Essentially many years ago, the original story of Christmas and how kids got presents on Christmas Day was that there was in fact a real person named Saint Nicholas who went around, stuck presents in people's shoes and a couple of other things, and he was a missionary from the local church. He was in fact an actual saint, but he went around, gave good kids presents, and eventually people started making adaptations of this guy, and they started making their own versions of the story and a whole bunch of other things. And one of those stories was of a demon named Krampus who hung around with him, and essentially the story behind Krampus was that it essentially did the job that the modern day Santa Claus does now, where nowadays, whereas Santa is the guy who's responsible for making the list, checking it twice, and giving good kids presents and giving bad kids gold. Krampus was originally the one who did the latter of those. Back when he was Saint Nicholas, he would visit bad children, and he would give them coal and birch branches, which essentially he visited homes and gave people bad presents. And obviously nowadays he's still very much celebrated in older countries that still celebrate the original traditions, but in America, not so much. He kind of isn't really a thing here, or at least not for the most part. There have been numerous attempts to adapt him into a film and a whole bunch of other things, but for the most part, he is not really. There's maybe like one movie that has actually successfully adapted him and known what Krampus actually does, and it's like the only good one. But for the most part, people just really don't know what to do with him, because they're just like, oh, it's this spooky thing that appears on Christmas, without fully understanding the lore and storytelling and all the other things behind what makes Krampus work. And the interesting thing here is that they actually adapted it into an episode of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, and it's it's kind of a really big episode. It's a really important one. But in any case, as I've established, that was just backstory to understand the episode and the context behind Krampus and why I like it. But in any case, the episode opens up with a kid just walking down the street in the middle of the night, blaring his boombox at full volume, and just generally giving all of the adults in the neighborhood a hard time. He's just being loud and obnoxious. He's just, being a kid. And at one point, he harasses an elderly woman and refuses to listen to her because of how old she is. And eventually, she just gets fed up with him and leaves. But it's at this point where suddenly as the kid is walking down the street, his boombox suddenly starts acting up and starts playing Christmas music, which of course causes him to become a little confused, and he tries to adjust the station to try and figure out what's going on. At which point he hears a voice telling him that he needs to start respecting his elders and treating the people older than him with respect. And of course introduces itself as Krampus, and then all of the lights on the neighborhood, all the street lights just suddenly go out while he's walking on the street. And initially, the kid is very dismissive of Krampus, calling him a little bit lame. But then Krampus gets very in his face and then roars at him, and then his hair suddenly turns stark white and becomes a lot longer. And then Krampus immediately disappears into the night, while the kid is just lying there, unable to comprehend what just happened to him. And meanwhile, at his house, Fred is putting all of his pieces of the planespheric disc. He's currently putting them inside a briefcase, which is then connected to his arm via a series of handcuffs. And essentially, the reason people do that is because if the briefcases are generally they'll have if they have something important with them and somebody doesn't want it getting stolen, they will handcuff it to their arm so that nobody steals it. And very much so, Fred is very much doing that. He's very much trying to keep the piece of the planespheric disc as safe. And at which point, Brad and Judy, who conveniently are trying to find the pieces, walk in on him doing this and ask him what he's doing. And he merely remarks that he's actually just putting something safe in the suitcase. And he then proceeds to tell his parents that because they finally have arrived and finally come back, he finally is able to trust adults again, since obviously he that's been a big hang up for him. Obviously, he was betrayed by Cassidy. He thought because Cassidy lied about who she was, and then Mayor Jones essentially just lied about who Fred really was as well, lied about his real parentage, and just generally kept Fred in the dark about where he really came from. So, several of the major adults in his life have not exactly been, well, trustworthy. And of course he remarks that he's very happy about them, and then pulls them into a hug. And then he proceeds to actually go and get ready to go, and he proceeds to go to the mystery machine, pointing out that he's actually going to be dealing with the Krampus case about the large goat, describing it as just a large goat man that's just been running around making people grow their hair long with fear. And then proceeds to tell them that should anything happen to him, he's more than happy to entrust them with whatever's in the briefcase. But of course, Brad and Judy aren't subtle about the fact that they want what's in the briefcase and even volunteered to take it off his hands immediately. But he then proceeds to tell them that no, that they need to, that the time will eventually come where he will in fact need to entrust them with what's in the briefcase. And he then proceeds to tell them that he's actually going to be keeping in the mystery machine for safekeeping, and then proceeds to go off to go put the briefcase in the mystery machine. At which point, Brad and Judy immediately call up Ricky and then proceed to tell him that they know exactly where the piece of the planespheric disc is, and tell Pericles to tell them that the pieces are as good as theirs. And of course, it's at this point where Fred actually drives the rest of the gang, which, as we find out, are actually on their way to the Crystal Cove arcade, which is where they've been asked to meet up with Mayor Nettles and Sheriff Stone. And as they're driving, they actually reminisce about what happened during the episode of the Midnight Zone. One thing I didn't mention is that Abigail Gluck actually whispered Nibiru, even though she's a corpse, which of course caused Velma to actually start looking into that as well. And of course, she does start explaining what she found on it to the rest of the gang while they're driving. And she does point out that, they do note, and the rest of the gang does note that that was a very weird thing for an old German lady to say. But it's at this point where she actually reveals that she did in fact Google it, and it proceeds to explain how the word Nibiru is actually in regards to an cosmological event. Essentially, the way they explain is that it's this cosmological event where it was actually published in a book called The 12th Planet, and the theories behind it, and according to the book and the various theories that she's reading up on it, Nibiru is apparently this borderline apocalyptic event where the residents of Nibiru are able to essentially cross over onto our world. And it explains how the people who inhabit Nibiru have actually essentially become living gods on our own planet. Is essentially what the theory is, and it's supposed to explain, and does kind of explain a little bit about that. But she does explain how what some people believe Nibiru actually is, which is that eventually Nibiru, the planet of Nibiru, will in fact collide with Earth and cause this huge apocalyptic extinction event, which of course causes Shaggy and Scooby to immediately start panicking, because obviously that's a very scary thing, and they're well within their rights. They're obviously the clever little cowards of the group, but here they have an actual reason to be scared. that is an actual genuine reaction to what is going on. But in any case, the group then proceeds to get out of the mystery machine and get ready to go into the arcade, and of course it's at this point where Shaggy does wonder why an old Jeremy Lee would whisper that, and wonders if she's just crazy. But Velma then proceeds to point out that she doesn't know what's going on with that, but that they'll absolutely need to look into that. In that case, they then proceed to go into the arcade, and we do find out that it's kind of a bit of a hybrid roller rink arcade type situation, and what we find out is that when they go to meet with Sheriff Stone and Mayor Nettles, what we find out is that and this is a really fun visual thing, but what we find out is that Sheriff Stone is currently playing a video game where he's shooting at the Phantom Shadows from Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, which I find kind of fun. But in case he notes that he feels like it's unrealistic and he's not having a very fun time with it. But then Mayor Nettles points out that no, it's not really a problem. He's just having a bit of a skill issue and is not very good at shooting at things. And he merely plays it, and Sheriff Stone merely plays it off that he's usually used to shooting at real criminals and hasn't had to shoot at fictional ones, and then proceeds to wander off to go play a spoof of Dance Dance Revolution. At which point the gang then proceeds to meet with Mayor Nettles, and she proceeds to go on to explain what their mystery is, about how she has actually been how the group has actually, how the how their town has actually been terrorized by the Krampus, and explains how it's been terrorizing kids and scaring off naughty children, and essentially while she points out it's normally great for the fact that that's getting delinquents off the streets and they're not causing problems. It's also causing a strain on the power grid because, as it turns out, nobody wants to sleep with the lights off anymore because the kids are all terrified of Krampus. So for that reason, they need to deal with the Krampus and keep it from causing problems. And of course, the gang then proceeds to wonder why exactly it is they met in an arcade specifically. And Sheriff Stone then proceeds to just point out that because that obviously they're meeting an arcade because delinquents just kind of hang out there. He points out delinquents are just kind of drawn to arcades. They like to hang out there late hours in the night, and just generally be rowdy and have a lot of fun. And he describes it as a prison with coin slots. And of course, as all of this is being explained, then the old Mr. Incorporated actually arrives outside of the building, inside the Enigma engine, which interestingly enough is Ricky describes as the Enigma machine, which I think could go either or, but it's very clearly says Enigma engine, so I don't know why they just didn't go with that. It's a little bit weird, but it's a thing. But in case he then tells them that he then proceeds to tell Brian and Judy that obviously he feels happy to actually have brought the Enigma engine out for a while, and what we find out is that apparently it is confirmed to actually be their equivalent of the Mystery Machine, and what we find out is that Ricky apparently was the one who owned it as a kid, and he's kept it well into his adulthood. So he still currently has the Enigma engine on him, and of course, Brad and Judy do comment on the fact that he's kept it in such great shape after all this time. But Professor Pericles gets patient with all three of them and tells them that they need to hurry up and actually get the piece of the Planet Spirit Disc away out of the Mystery Machine, since they know who it is and they're not going to have a lot of time to actually go in and steal it and get it back. So for that reason, he kind of urges Brad and Judy to hurry up and go get it. And of course they do. And true to form, we do find out that Fred actually created a large series of traps to actually guard the pieces of the Planet Spirit Disc inside the Mystery Machine, so that nobody takes it while he's gone. And Brad and Judy merely look at each other and just go, "That's our boy." But in any case, they're currently just trying to break into the Mystery Machine and steal the pieces of the Planet Spirit Disc. And they do that constantly throughout the background of the episode, because that is their main goal throughout the episode. But in any case, the new Mr. Incorporated are actually just screwing around in the arcade while trying to figure out where the Krampus is supposed to come in. And as they're doing that, Sheriff Stone is actually yelling at three teenage girls to actually calm down and stop going so fast. And it's at this point where the Krampus actually shows up and attacks Sheriff Stone and causes his hair to grow out and turn white. And he then proceeds to actually proceeds to collapse, and Mayor Nettles actually catches him. At which point he then proceeds to attack the 3 girls that Sheriff Stone was actually yelling at, and proceeds to try and drag them off. But Mystery Incorporated quickly gives chase, and Krampus then proceeds to throw them off his trail by throwing the 3 girls at them, and they do catch the girls, but what Krampus does wind up escaping and leaps outside of the arcade, and of course, this is this point where Mystery Incorporated come outside to give chase, and Brad and Judy immediately duck back inside the Enigma engine because Mr. E has to pick them up and tell them that they need to go, because since obviously things have gone sideways and they can't really stick around there anymore, so they leave. At which point the rest of the new Mystery Incorporated come out, and Velma merely comments that they do need to actually take care of Krampus, if this is the kind of problems that they're going to be dealing with. And also Sheriff Stone starts looking in the mirror and points out that he feels like a wizard from Middle Earth, which this is a fun reference, but he does start bawling like a baby because his hair is now long and gray, and he isn't particularly happy about that. But in that case, the Krampus then proceeds to loom over the whole thing and then proceeds to run off. And of course, is this point where the new Mystery Incorporated then proceed to go to the Crystal Cove Spook Museum and start looking into the legends regarding the Krampus and the other things, and essentially they find exactly what I just described to you at the start of the review. That Krampus was a mythological figure that of course would terrorize kids back in the old country of Germany and all the other similar locations over there, but and that he would actually punish bad kids who misbehaved, and which does confirm what Mayor Nettles said about how Krampus has been terrorizing naughty children in Crystal Cove. And because he's normally a Christmas figure, they note that it seems like it's a bit of an off season for him to just appear when it's nowhere near Christmas. He just appears in it's implied to be like spring or summer or something. Either way, he's not supposed to be out yet, so they do know it's a bit of an off season. And of course, it's at this point where they do walk up, where of course the gang then, where of course Fred then proceeds to walk off to go think about some things, and of course Daphne does indeed decide to follow him along, and of course Fred reveals that actually the whole situation with Krampus reminds him of his not dad, Mayor Jones. What we find out is that the situation with Mayor Jones and Krampus is eerily similar, because Mayor Jones actually did discourage a lot of the behavior Fred inhibits now, and he does note that did make him a little bit sad at the time, but now that he's living with Brad and Judy, who actually encourage that kind of behavior and more or less just kind of treat him as if he can do nothing wrong, he kind of misses that kind of those kinds of interactions with Mayor Jones. He misses the fact that Mayor Jones Mr. Mayor Jones, despite everything, did actually pay attention to him and did kind of love him in his own way. So he does miss that. And of course, Daphne does console him, but then notes that something is missing. And Fred thinks she's talking about his own home life, so he does note that something does feel missing. But then she interrupts him and reveals that actually because they are in the museum section of it. But they do find out that one of the exhibits is missing. Charlie the Haunted Robot, who, if you don't know, is a classic villain from Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? He is probably one of the more noteworthy ones in that he's the only one from the original 25 villains from the original series that didn't wear a costume. He was just he was an actual robot that actually just went haywire and ran amok. So yeah, they do note that he obviously should be there. And the fact that Charlie is just missing from his exhibit strikes them as off. So they immediately realize that they need to actually figure out what's going on with that connection. Meanwhile, what we find out is that the old Mystery Incorporated are actually spying on them with a robotic rat, and of course they do point that, and of course Brad and Judy do note that the Krampus mystery seems to be shaping up to be very interesting. And it's at this point where Professor Perkley starts reminiscing about the fact that about what he was in Germany as a hatchling, and does remark about how he does have fond memories of when Krampus used to terrorize kids back in the old country, and Brad and Judy just kind of look at him a little funny, because obviously Krampus is a scary dude, and the fact that Professor Perkley remembers him fondly is a little bit weird. But of course, Ricky does in fact interrupt him, pointing out that regardless of whether or not of reminiscing or their beliefs on Krampus, they do point out that for the time being, he's actually causing a lot of problems and is actually making it a lot more difficult to actually steal the pieces of the Planet Spirit disc. But of course, Professor Perkley then reassures him, and then orders Ricky to open up their vault, and they do in fact go inside, and what we find out is that the vault is actually opened using a series of keyboard strokes on an actual keyboard, not like a computer keyboard, like a piano keys. But in case they then descend down to the vault, revealing that that's where they actually keep the pieces of the Planet Spirit disc, and do point out that since the Krampus is actually distracting the new Mystery Incorporated, it gives them more opportunities to actually go and steal the pieces of the Planet Spirit disc out from under their noses. And of course, sure enough, they're looking into. They then proceed to the new Mystery Incorporated do start talking about how they don't really know the connection between the Krampus mystery and yet, pointing out that obviously Krampus is that obviously they don't know why Charlie the Hunted Robot is missing. But they do know that, or why it's connected to the mystery, but they do know that something is obviously very strange and very weird. But of course they do point out that obviously they need to figure out how to actually stop him, and of course this is this point where I forget who, I think it's Shaggy, but he comments that it's not like they can just lock all of the kids in prison and just create a giant bait trap for old Krampus. But it's at this point that actually gives Fred a bit of an idea. As it turns out, Fred actually knows where they can find a kid that is actually potentially the baddest of them all. And they then proceed to go to Crystal Cove Penitentiary, which I should note is just full of all the various other villains that the Mystery Incorporated has caught over the years, but or at least just all the ones that we've seen in the series so far. But they do arrive there and immediately go to Mary Ann Glearden, who, if you don't remember, was from the Kate Horrifico case. But they do come to her and actually start pleading with her to ask if she would like to help them catch the Krampus. And of course, while they're in the prison, the old Mystery Incorporated do arrive at the prison. They do follow after the new Mystery Incorporated, and do try to break into the Mystery Machine again, and try to steal the piece of the Planet Spirit disc. And of course, while that's happening, Mary Ann does point out that she's actually learned a lot of things in prison, most of which involve turning her pigtails into lethal weapons. But she does ask them, in addition to that, while she would like to actually serve as bait for the Krampus, she does point out that there's nothing in it for her, and asks what they will do for her. At which point Daphne pulls out a letter of clements, a letter for Mary Ann Glearden, essentially just making it so that they can actually get time off her sentence for good behavior as a reward for helping them. While they're playing with Mary Ann to actually try and get her to help, Shaggy and Scooby, of course, immediately go off to go find the prison cafeteria, where we actually see several of the people they've caught just hanging around in there. Because obviously they're prisoners, they have nowhere else to go. But of course they start scooping up the food, remarking that, and then proceed to actually go off and go sit down and ask a fellow prisoner if they can sit with them, and the fellow prisoner and the prisoner immediately responds that it's a free country, and they sit down and start eating. At which point Mary Ann points out that this is obviously a very honest bargain, and remarks that she's tempted, but she also points out that she's in prison, she's relatively safe, she doesn't think the Krampus is going to come after her. At which point she's immediately proven wrong when the Krampus then proceeds to jump in through the prison windows, and tells Mary Ann that she shouldn't be so sure. At which point he uses his scream to cause Mary Ann's hair to grow out and to become white. And then at which point he scoops her up and runs off. And Fred tries to give chase after the Krampus, but the Krampus merely beats him with his stick and sends Fred flying. And Daphne does reassure him and asks if he's okay. And he does pick himself back up, pointing out that he's mostly fine. And the gang then proceeds to give chase through the prison as they chase after Krampus. And of course Krampus is just making very short work of all the prison guards who are trying and failing to fight off the Krampus as he just rampages through the prison. And of course, all while Mr. Incorporated, Sans, Shaggy, and Scooby are actually chasing after him. And of course, they do eventually run through the cafeteria, where of course Shaggy and Scooby-Doo point out that they will immediately join them after they finish their month-old prison cobbler. But then Velma just grabs both of them and drags them off, and they continue to chase after Krampus and Mary Ann. And at which point Brad and Judy have almost successfully disarmed the trap that Fred had set inside the Mystery Machine, but then of course the new Mystery Incorporated comes out and they immediately have to get back inside the Enigma engine, and they kind of complain about the fact that the only thing they hate worse about not finishing a trap is almost finishing it. At which point they get into the van, and the Krampus then proceeds to just continue to rampage through Crystal Cove. And the new Mystery Incorporated gives chase while the old Mystery Incorporated secretly follow them. And eventually Krampus does eventually wind up in an old doll factory which we find out is supposedly haunted. And of course Daphne does point out that it seems strange that Krampus would run in there since she remarks that she thought it was turned into an old orphanage years ago, but of course Fred then corrects her, pointing out that actually she's talking about the location across the street, the old haunted orphanage, which is similarly also closed down and condemned. So, but of course they go inside, and of course they wonder why Krampus would go in there in the first place, and they merely pointed out that, and Scooby merely points out that it's probably the most evil place that they can actually go. At which point, the Enigma engine pulls up behind the Mystery Machine, and once again, Brad and Judy get out and start disarming the trap again. And of course, Fred, the rest of the gang then proceed to go through the place, trying to find out where exactly it is that Krampus is hiding. And they do eventually find him hiding behind a shelf full of old doll heads, which the Krampus then proceeds to push on top of them, and then proceeds to just continue to rampage to run away from them through the factory. But Fred actually winds up turning the conveyor belt down, and they wind up giving chase that way. At which point Fred decides to spring a trap using what they have lying around, being a tarp and a series of hooks and wires that are just inside the factory already. And of course it does wind up working. They wind up trapping the Krampus inside the tarp, who then proceeds to drop Mary Ann Glierdon, and Fred catches her, and she does thank him. At which point Velma and Daphne do hook the cables onto the tarp, and he then proceeds to get pulled into a turntable, and he winds up getting spun around and dropped into a pile of doll heads. At which point Velma decides that now it's time to finally unmask the Krampus, and what they find out is that it's actually Charlie the haunted robot, which of course confuses the hell out of the gang, because they point out that doesn't make any goddamn sense. Obviously, they point out that obviously Charlie is not a human. He doesn't have any sort of emotions or whatever. He's not able to act on his own. So they remark that if Charlie the haunted robot was in fact responsible, that means that somebody else had to have been controlling them. At which point the gang then proceed to come out, and they see the Enigma engine just drive away, and they remark that it had to have been the old Mystery Incorporated, and Scooby asks what they could have possibly been doing there. At which point Fred reveals that he actually checks the back of the Mystery Machine and reveals that their pieces of the Planet Spirit Disc are actually gone. Which of course causes them to become very upset and very angry. But meanwhile, Brad and Judy gloat to the rest of the new old Mystery Incorporated that they actually have the pieces of the Planet Spirit Disc now, and now they can actually put it together and finally assemble the whole thing. And of course, they immediately go down into the vault, only to discover that their own pieces are missing, which confuses them greatly. And even confusing them even more is there's actually a CD with their old logo on it, which they then immediately bring back to Mr. E's lair and immediately put inside the DVD player. And what we find out is that the person behind the Krampus mystery was in fact the new Mystery Incorporated themselves. What we find out is that Fred actually orchestrated the whole thing, as we find out via the tape. And they orchestrated the whole thing to actually get the old Mystery Incorporated to lower their guard so that they could steal the entirety of the Planet Spirit disc out from under their noses. As we find out, how they did it was that they actually borrowed some things from German gypsies in the haunted forest to make the costume for Krampus. They hired Jason Wyatt from the Fright Hound mystery, and they asked him to help out, and he did. He decides to actually help them not only control the Krampus remotely from his house, so that they can just do whatever, but in addition to that, he also invented an aerosol that was in fact the thing that caused people's hair to grow and become white and gray, and of course what we find out is that he actually did that with to get penance from his mother's sentence, since obviously he's been living in his house this whole time. His mother's been arrested, and she grounded him, and she has effectively grounded him in the meantime. So he can't leave the house. But and of course, what we find out is that actually the plea bargain for Mary Ann Gleason was in fact a real thing. That's the current mayor, Mayor Nettles, actually did. And as it turns out, Scooby and Shaggy going off to go eat food was also part of the plan, because as it turns out, while they were sitting down eating prison food, it's actually revealed that actually they swapped out the real pieces of the Planet Spirit disc with fake ones, while Scooby and Shaggy gave them to the one person that the old Mystery Incorporated wouldn't suspect would have them, Mayor Jones, Fred Jones Sr. And what we find out is that Fred Jones Sr. actually, despite trying to steal the Planet Spirit disc pieces in the past, he did find out what they were doing, and when he found out that they were trying to best the old Mystery Incorporated, he happily volunteered to help, because obviously he doesn't like the old Mystery Incorporated either. So yeah, for those reasons, they all volunteered. All of those things just resulted in them being able to actually steal the pieces of the plant to trick the new Mystery Incorporated, the old Mystery Incorporated, and stealing the new Mystery Incorporated's pieces of the Planet Spirit disc. But to go one step further than that, when Fred pulled his parents into a hug earlier, he bugged Brad so that they could get the password to the musical password to Mr. E's vault. And then they gave that information to Hot Dog Water, who then broke into Mr. E's vault and stole the remaining pieces of the Planet Spirit disc. And of course, it's at this point where Fred points out that he hoped he didn't have to do any of this. He was hoping he wouldn't have to actually betray his own parents like that. But obviously pointing out that he was hoping that they would never try to steal the pieces from him. But obviously, he realizes now that he was wrong. And then points out that they shouldn't expect him to come home for dinner, ever. And to add insult to injury, Scooby reveals that they actually kidnapped Nova, with Scooby pointing out that she's actually too good for them. At which point the video ends, and the old Mystery Incorporated just sits there dumbfounded about the fact that their predecessors just completely bamboozled them. And now the new Mystery Incorporated, with all 6 pieces of the Planet Spirit disc, finally decide to put it together, and it does start glowing, and we finally do see the completed Planet Spirit disc. So I'm finally going to picture it here. But in case with it now assembled, Scooby then wonders out loud what they're supposed to do with it now that they have it. At which point we then see the supposed cursed treasure underneath Crystal Cove, and specifically the crystal sarcophagus from the Conquistador episode. And what we find, and of course we then hear the voice inside the sarcophagus, this evil entity that one episode built up. And it proceeds to whisper Nibiru before chuckling madly inside of its coffin. And yeah, that's essentially where the episode is. So essentially, this episode was just a big ploy for Mystery Incorporated to steal the remaining pieces of the Planet Spirit disc away from their predecessors. And Fred apparently does not trust his parents anymore because, of course. I mean, would you? If your parents just tried to steal a thing out from under your noses and you were pretty confident they were going to try at some point? I mean, it makes sense, but yeah, this is just a big. This is just a big episode. This is like the 13th episode in the second season, and Mystery Incorporated has effectively just stolen has the entire piece of the Planesburg disc now, which means that they can finally continue onward with the main plot, which is that they need to actually use the piece of the Planesburg disc to actually. They just now need to use the completed Planesburg disc and figure out what it's supposed to do. But in any case, for that, I think I'm going to leave this episode here. So thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does help support me. I mainly use it to fund future projects, so just go check that out. If you can, I don't expect anybody to actually donate, but if you can provide donations to help out future projects, I would very much appreciate it. And also be sure to check out my Twitch. I stream this every Sunday on there, so just go check that out. Also, be sure to go check out my Twitter as well. I post updates over there. Go check those out. Go check out my Discord if you want to connect with me. I mainly just use it to talk to you guys, but I also want to try and do more film watch-alongs. So if you absolutely want to see those, be sure to just go check those out, because I would absolutely love to do more of those. But, yeah, and also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!